club takes pleasure in attracting a stellar list of speakers that address today's most relevant issues. The club's place as a refuge for rich discussion and networking has never wavered after 123 seasons.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Hello, my name is Jay Kirschalland, and I'm a director at the Canadian Club of Toronto. I am excited to welcome you all here today, and specifically to acknowledge that I am meeting on the traditional lands of many Indigenous peoples all over the country, but specifically where I am, most recently has been the land of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, on whose territory, again, sort of at least online, the Canadian Club of Toronto is gathering. We're grateful for the opportunity to meet on this land, and I'm particularly grateful to be talking about a subject that I believe is crucial to our society right now. Skills has been a focus of mine for a long time. I founded something called Lighthouse Labs, Canada's foremost software development boot camp. Recently moved online as a result of the pandemic. I work for LinkedIn Learning as my full-time job, running workforce development in higher education across North America for LinkedIn Learning. And most recently, I've been involved in the founding of something called the International Council of Badges and Credentials, looking to harmonize some of the many platforms that currently exist around badging and credentialing online, and specifically to try to make more of that data open and to connect it so that we can do what the panelists today are focusing on, innovate around skills development and help build a more inclusive society around it. I'm excited by our moderator in particular, who I'll say a few more words about later, but I am on the board of her organization, the Canadian Council on Youth Prosperity, and like many of the other organizations I work with, the Information Communication Technology Council, for instance, I'm also on the board of Skills is right at the center of what they're working on, which makes this conversation incredibly topical. Today, we're joined by a panel of experts that I could not be more excited to introduce you to. The discussions, as I said, is going to be focused on the skills we need for a balanced recovery and how to best deliver them. Our concern is a recovery that favors the highly skilled, but leaves no one. Our concern is that the recovery right now is looking like it's already favoring the highly skilled, I should say, and leaving many others behind. And so this panel will be all about some of the solutions to that increasing gap, to the acceleration of inequality that the pandemic has in many ways created, specifically around skills. And as a result, today's panelists are going to discuss some of the ways that we can work to bring both young and old back into the workforce, while also trying to even out the playing field for underserved and at-risk communities across Canada. Before we dive into the topic today, a few logistics, and then I'll say a couple words on skills, and then I'm super excited to hand it over to our esteemed panelists. So on the logistics, the click here to switch stream button, which you will all see and you don't always see on these calls, that button helps if your internet is slow, if the quality is lagging, it'll increase the audio quality. It could decrease the video quality, but it'll allow that stream to come through strong. So again, if you're having any issues with connecting, first try the click here to switch stream button. If you have questions, click on the questions tab. You can enter your questions in the window there, and they'll be sent directly to the moderator. And finally, if you do need help, there is a request help button located in the bottom right corner of the page. That's for tech support. Importantly, thank you today for our sponsors. Our sponsors, the Canadian Bankers Association and the Future Skills Centre, are essential to the running of the Canadian Club. We're a nonprofit, and we've been gathering people together for 124 years. It is because of our sponsors that we continue to do that, and we are grateful for your support for today's discussion on this important topic. Career development and assessment connected to skills-based hiring, in my opinion, is the most important topic in terms of our recovery. Fighting inequality and fixing our labor markets is only going to happen if we can get employers to focus on skills-based hiring and if we can get those who deliver education to focus on skills as well. I've had a couple conversations in the past few months that have emphasized this point more and more and more. So for instance, last week at a conference by College Promise, a US organization trying to increase access to community colleges, the head of Burning Glass, Matt Siegelman, and I were talking about everything from learning pathways to skills development based on labor market information. And I think the Future Skills Center and NPower, two organizations that are going to talk to you today, are right at the forefront of the movement to focus on exactly that. In another conversation set up by Bob Ramsey with Roger Martin, one of our illustrious Torontonians, I discussed why the labor market is the most inefficient market. And he kept pointing out that it is because we keep hiring people who look and walk and talk like us, people who we know, people who check off easy boxes like degrees or a number of years of experience, instead of focusing on skills, diversity, and human dignity as our panelists do today. And finally, recently I was on a McKinsey Consortium of Learning Innovation event with the CEO of Jobs for the Future, a US think tank focused on similar issues. And we were trying to get the group to focus on what we're going to talk about today. Instead of learning from all of these luminaries, focusing on what teams in large organizations with lots of resources can do to learn more effectively, let's focus on the populations that need it. Let's focus on the massive unemployment, inequality, and the network and opportunity gap crisis that is mounting because of our pandemic. And I'm really excited to hear from our panelists on all of those subjects. Pedro Barata is the Executive Director of the Future Skills Center. He's got the star behind him. Julia Blackburn is CEO of NPower Canada. Filsan Kulane is chair of NPower Canada's Youth Advisory Council and is a business systems analyst at RBC. And Jenny Poulos is a senior VP of workforce strategy and employee experience at RBC and chair of the Future Skills Center. All four are integral to the skills development that is happening at the core of Canada's innovation engine. And I'm excited to hear how the four relate to each other in addition to what each of those organizations is doing independently and what they're doing as individuals. And as I said earlier, I'm super excited to also introduce our moderator, Gladys Ahovi. I am on the board of the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity, which she founded and is the executive lead of. It's one of the organizations I'm most excited about in this space moving forward. And with that, I'm going to jump into one of the club's classic traditions. It's never been my forte, but it is one of our most cherished traditions. And so it hasn't changed in this virtual world. I'm going to make a toast to our country. We do it with water because, well, it's noon. And it's usually done in person by raising a glass. So I'll ask you all to raise a glass and let's make a nod towards the screen and a toast to Canada. Gladys, with that, I'm super excited to turn the Canadian Club's podium over to you.
Thank you so much, Jake. Good afternoon, everyone. Perhaps good morning to some of you, depending on where you are in the country. Welcome to our conversation. We're really thrilled to have everyone here. As Jake mentioned, I'm Gladys Ahovi. I'm the executive lead at the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity. I'm thrilled to get into conversation with our panelists. So thank you so much for being a part of our discussion today. We're going to jump right into it. Just to give you a bit of a background and context for the conversation, we are in unprecedented times, as we all know. An agenda on forward-looking skills was already quite present pre-pandemic. It was a pressing issue pre-pandemic, and even more important as we continue to live through this experience and think about what recovery could and should look like. The pandemic has accelerated many, many, many things, including the adoption of new technologies, addressing gaps and really acknowledging gaps and addressing gaps in training, relevant training for Canadians everywhere in every corner of the country. Magnification of inequalities and how we accurately address them. As we think about moving forward from emergency response to COVID to an agenda of recovery, what is the role of the skills agenda and how do we need to prepare for a recovery that is future oriented? You know, preparing for the future is very much on the mind of all these organizations. And so we're going to delve into that a little bit more this afternoon. At my organization, at CCYP, we're keeping youth front and center in recovery planning. We are actively looking at as a national nonprofit organization, bolstering the youth workforce development ecosystem. The pandemic has greatly shifted our work. We're actively working with young people to talk about what role they want to play in the space of recovery, how they want to exercise their voice. identifying the issues of key consideration to them. We believe that any recovery effort and agenda must include youth perspectives because they will be the most impacted by the pandemic over the long term. We saw that pre-pandemic, and we anticipate that as we move towards recovery. The Impact COVID, one of the things we're working on right now is our Impact COVID Road to Recovery initiative. We're actively working with 80 young people across the country to look at a co-designed youth-informed recovery plan, what that will look like, and we'll be excited to share that in the coming months. Today, we're going to look at the trends, the emerging thinking and about skills, promising practices, and start to frame a skills agenda for the recovery. So with that, we're going to jump into it, and I cannot wait to hear the opinions and thoughts from our panelists today. We're going to kick it off with Pedro. Pedro, as we think about the skills in this context of all the things that are changing and evolving and the new emerging needs, what is rising to the top in this discussion? How do we need to think about future-proofing skills?
Thank you, Gladys, and thank you as well to the Canadian Club for hosting this conversation, and Jake in particular for being so passionate in terms of championing this issue and making sure that we get to have this conversation. And I should say thank you as well to everybody who's joined us over their lunch hour. We're all zoomed out, and yet here we are. It's a healthy crowd, and it's really important for us that we get to host conversations with that really stress collaboration. One of our unsaid mottos at the Future Skills Center is that we want skills innovation to not be an elite sport. We want skills innovation to be owned by the entire ecosystem. And anytime you get, the numbers that we're seeing here today, we're seeing a collaboration that is owned by everybody. And look, so future-proofing skills and what is this playbook in terms of the final destination or the ultimate destination? We're all going through this collective accelerated crash course in basic digital skills. We've just experienced that over the past few months, and I think it's fair to say that's raised the table stakes on what is basic digital fluency. So the baseline for communicating online and more blended kind of communications, for using collaboration tools, whatever inertia or resistance was there before, to using more web-based tools and really leveraging digital. I think that's owned by more and more of us, and more of us are going to need that. It's becoming like reading and numeracy, right, as the basic skill. And that is really the new floor for the next level of advanced tech skills. And that is where the greatest demand is going to be. And whether you look globally at where OECD is pointing to in terms of greatest demand, or even right here, in terms of what we're seeing from the Business Council CEOs, it's the ability to leverage emerging technologies like AI, machine learning, automation. Those will be the top tranche of skills, both globally and at home. But alongside these tech skills are very human skills that will be in high demand. And we see that as well, both in the CEO survey by the Business Council, as well as surveys that have tapped into Canadians across the country that we've done with Environics. Social and emotional skills are key increasingly to individual and collective success. And in a context of where we're seeing rapid change, constant adaptation, who do you want to work with? You want to work with people who are resilient and confident in the face of new experiences, people who are eager to learn new things and who are not fazed by new experiences. You want to work with people who are good collaborators, right? Who are not fazed by working in multidisciplinary teams, learning new language, and especially in an even more global environment that we're going to see as a result of these kind of platforms, working with a diversity of colleagues. And finally, people who are also open to learning and where lifelong learning is a principle that is actually embraced. And these are the social and emotional skills that are really going to be, I think, at the forefront of demand for all of us. So at a high level, I think the destination is clear on skills. It's the roadmap for how we ensure that everybody is equipped with these skills that we're really working on. And to Jake's point, it's also ensuring that we have all hands on deck and that nobody falls through the cracks, and that we really drive towards this prosperity thing in an inclusive way.
That is excellent. Yeah, and so it's about the roadmap. How do we get there? You know, and we're making the road as we build. We're walking the road as we build it, so to speak. So that is great. And so with that, You know, as workplaces evolve, upskilling and reskilling will be important for everyone. You talked about who do you want to work with? And Jake had mentioned, you know, part of our challenge is that we tend to hire and work with those who reflect us. And so how do we broaden that pool and make sure we're taking a more inclusive approach? In your opinion, Pedro, how do we go about ensuring that skills training contributes to more inclusive outcomes?
Well, I think a place to start and a place to focus on, and we're certainly doing that, is to focus on the ecosystem and its capacity to not treat human beings as cogs in a machine, but to recognize that we need to serve people who are coming forward with all kinds of different experiences and all kinds of different needs. And more of us are going to be looking for career advice and guidance, whether we are, you know, new to the labor force or a mid-career worker or somebody who's looking to do less job and more of what I love. I think this new economic reality is going to lead all of us to seek skill support, and where we go for that and getting more responsive supports is going to be key. And within that, of course, there's the reality of structural and systemic barriers. And here, perhaps, rather than me answering this question, I turn the tables on you. Because, of course, the Canadian Council on Youth Prosperity is doing a lot of work in the area of actually focusing on the skills that skills providers need. And we were quite seized by an idea that you brought to us around strength and structure as a way to build a roadmap for how we deliver services in an inclusive way. So rather than me taking up space, I'll turn this question on its head and ask you what you're working on that side.
Yeah, thanks so much, Pedro. So agreed. I loved that you mentioned ecosystem, because that is our playpen at CCYP, and we recognize the important role that different stakeholders are playing, different contributors are playing, like our panelists here. But one of the things we're really focused on is building our collective capacity to respond to the emerging needs. And part of the emerging need right now that the pandemic has brought upon us is to address some of the gaps in our system that have long plagued us. And one of those areas is our long histories of systemic challenges around anti-racist practice, around diversity and inclusion. And so we're really, really, really thrilled to be partnering with the Future Skills Center on our new initiative, which is Strength and Structure. And it is really looking at building the capacity in our ecosystem to improve employment outcomes and employment experiences for Black and Indigenous youth. Historically, we know that despite the many, hundreds of thousands of dollars of investments, we continue to see less than stellar outcomes of publicly funded services for Black and Indigenous youth. So there's something that's not working in our service provision model and or our collective capacity to really understand the challenges experienced by these young people. And so we're really excited to be working on addressing this, looking at how we build capacity, how we bring that infrastructure into our ecosystem and strengthen it right across the board. So more to come on that. Thrilled to be working on it. And yeah, thanks for shining the light back on us. I'm going to go back to my moderator role.
That's okay. Just my take on it and why we found it so compelling is how is it that we help mainstream skills development organizations actually understand and adopt better practices that understand not everybody's starting from the same place? Yes. And how do you take very grassroots organizations that come up through the community that often are too busy with just like the day-to-day issues, right, and challenges? And how is it that you build the capacity to elevate that game and to really help organizations that are new, more grassroots-based, think at a systems level? I think that's really exciting. Anyway, back to you, moderator.
Thank you. Absolutely. So I'm gonna continue on this path of thinking about how do we create more inclusive communities and have an inclusive recovery agenda strategy, and tap into one of our panelists here who would have typically been considered as non-traditional talent. So Filsan, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump over to you. And I would love it if you could share with us a little bit about your experience with NPower Canada as a program participant, and now as the chair of NPower's Youth Advisory Council, in terms of what are young people saying and expressing regarding their expectations of participating in the labor market and the workforce. So maybe just starting us off with your experience with the NPower Canada program and how that's brought you over to RBC would be wonderful.
Thanks, Gladys. So I'm Filsan Kulane. I am a NPower Canada Class 3 alumni. I was in the class back in 2016. And throughout my experience, pretty much at the beginning of the program, I didn't expect an actual meaningful career to come out of a program like this. You think that traditionally you need a bachelor's degree to like work at a bank or a consulting firm or all these big companies in Canada. And NPower proved that that's not the case. You can work for a major company or bank and have a meaningful job where you're making an impact without a degree. And I think that a lot of people look at a degree as something that's like a step, like a first step. And like it's required to get your foot in the door, and that's just not the case for me. That has not been my experience. With NPower, I feel like not only with the connections that I've made through the program, as well as the skills that I learned, I was able to get my foot in the door at a major bank and work my way up to where I am now. So I'm super grateful for NPower. With that being said, I think that the trend that we have within the Youth Council right now and the thoughts that people are having with regards to the pandemic specifically are mainly what happens once a pandemic's over? Like, am I going to be forgotten about? A lot of people that I know in the program have continued to work, and which is awesome, and some haven't, right? And those who haven't mainly don't have an undergraduate degree or some sort of like traditional credential, I guess you would say, to get to those positions. And I think that, like you mentioned, Pedro, it's like, how do we ensure that they're not forgotten about? And how do we ensure that, okay, once the pandemic is over, or once the year is over, or once the economy is like back to how it was before, how do we ensure that these people with these great social skills, with these great skills, with all these different experiences are not just forgotten about? So I think that's one of the major concerns I've heard within our alumni.
So young people want to work, they want to participate, they may not have the full set of skills that they need, but they want to be there. So how do we continue to support them? How do we make sure that they're part of the equation of this talent pool that will support Canada's recovery and work?
And I think it's programs like CCYP and NPower that like help put like the spotlight on people who have these great skills who are often overlooked. And I think like one of the major things, like one of the major takeaways I had from several conversations with alumni is give them a chance. Like they are fully capable of doing all these roles. They're super smart. They bring a different perspective to the table, great ideas. And I think one of the major outcomes from the pandemic was people need to be able to pivot, be able to be agile, be able to move quickly. And I think that the youth, regardless of their credentials, have those skills embedded in them. So I think it's really important to give them a chance. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. And so let's talk about how do we create that opportunity? How do we create that chance? And so Julie, I'm going to tap into you. You are the CEO of NPower Canada, creating opportunities for brilliant young people, high potential young people like Filsan. Tell us how your organization has been lauded as, one of the programs that is solution oriented, that is demand led, really taking the critical factors that employers say that they need and weaving that into a program that results in them being able to access to talent in a really fluid manner. So where's, so much so that FSC is helping NPower to scale. You're spreading out across the country. So maybe you can tell us where, what's the model of NPower and where you're heading next, how your organization is supporting employers through this really challenging time.
Sure, thanks. We have had some great outcomes and successes over the last 6 years. And I think our services are needed more now than ever to ensure that youth aren't left behind as the economy rebounds in the way that Filsan discussed. We've grown quite a bit. We are only 6 years old in Canada. We served 87 youth that were unemployed or underemployed back in 2015 when we launched, and over 1,000 youth last year in 2020 across the GTA and in Calgary. So to date, we have over 1,600 youth that have graduated from the program, and more than 80% have secure employment or are enrolled in post-secondary education, which we also consider a big win, all within 6 months of completing the program. So the model is definitely working. And with the support, as you mentioned, of the Future Skills Center and some government funding from all levels, and our national corporate partners like RBC. We are launching in Halifax in January. We just did a public announcement there recently. And in Vancouver, we're launching in September of 21. So we are becoming a true pan-Canadian organization. And we found that our services are needed in all of those communities. We're a charity that does work to reduce poverty in Canada by addressing youth unemployment, but how we go about that, our model really contributes to economic development and supports businesses of all sizes. And what we do is really act as a bridge between unemployed youth or underemployed youth that have multiple barriers to employment and businesses that need to fill junior level IT roles. So our participants may be a newcomer that has no connections or networks in Canada, or a youth, as Filsan explained, that maybe for financial reasons is unable to complete post-secondary education. And as she said, although these young people are a great source of talent for businesses, they just can't get into the labor market through traditional hiring channels. So we're really launching those youth, giving them the skills and the connections and introductions that they need, opening those doors and launching them into IT careers, and at the same time addressing skills gaps in the IT sector. So, you know, I believe we do several things very well, but the real key to our success, our real sort of secret sauce, if you will, is our relationships with the employers. Our entire process and our entire philosophy begins with our employer partners in any given market. It doesn't begin with the training, and it doesn't even begin with the youth. It's essential to be successful. We believe that we understand employers' talent strategies and their hiring needs. You know, what jobs do they need to fill, and what skills are required to succeed in those jobs, whether they be technical certifications or their soft skills, professional skills. Then we develop curriculum based on that input from those employers. And we do this through individual consultations with our largest employers. We have an industry council that advises us about what skills currently are in demand and what might be coming down the road in terms of future skills. So we do this in real time. You know, there's very little lag time when we update our training curriculum. It's to really reflect that market demand. It happens very, very quickly. So we really believe that employer-driven methodology is ensuring that youth, in our case youth, have the right skills to gain really meaningful employment. And the employers also have a pipeline of diverse young talent. You know, we're really providing employers with a great service. And although they're supporting their community by working with us, they're also really helping their own bottom line. It's good business. They come back to us and say, wow, these are great candidates. We make the onboarding process very smooth. So we really provide good customer service. We speak business to business. We don't talk about ourselves as a charity when we're trying to place a youth with a business. It's about good business. So we really believe that this employer-driven strategy is a real key to our success.
That's excellent. And I'm so glad you mentioned that this is, you know, you are a charity, but this is not about a charitable contribution in terms of an employer's participation. You know, you are connecting them to talent that you are actively preparing based on their input and feedback regarding the skills they need, the talent that they need, and doing it in a way that connects them to a talent pool that they would otherwise not be able to access. And I think that is it's not only exciting, it's so critical to the way that we need to think about moving forward. And you're doing it with employers of all different sizes, which I also think is really important for us to remember. And in partnership with groups like RBC. And Jenny, you've been working in this territory for many, many years. And I would say that NPower Canada is one of the new emerging kind of non-traditional intermediaries when it comes to talent development and supporting, providing workforce interventions. Would love to hear from you on your thoughts regarding these types of intermediaries and how they contribute to the workforce going forward, but really about the role of employers and investing in talent development, training, and especially in light of pandemic disruption, what you think the pandemic will impact the future of work in the short and long term going forward.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for the question, Gladys, and it's great to be on this panel. Thanks for having me. I think, so much to unpack there. I think, along with it being a very stressful time, it's been a very insightful time for all of us. I think it's really highlighted what we're all capable of doing and doing together. And many things that we've learned that we can continue to leverage going forward. In a way we're living, I think Pedro noted this as well, a live experiment that we're in the midst of. And Filsan, you talked about pivoting. I think we're all doing that great big pivot. So the future work, I think, we've accelerated forward into this space. Work is changing now, and we're seeing this across many sectors. And it's because of the rapid adoption of technology. And it's creating that need to rapidly develop new skills. We're quickly seeing certain jobs melt away, and it's creating space for many new jobs that require new and different skills. And I think the speed of this change will just continue. I think many of you probably heard about the shelf life of skills continues to shorten. At one time, it was a 10-year lifespan for skills. Now it's 5 years, probably even 3. So it is requiring us to work together to figure out ways to help to rapidly upskill and reskill Canadians, and to really work together. I think it starts with, Julia, you noted around working together with across organizations, understanding what the talent strategies are, understanding what the needs are, so that we can all keep at pace with the changes that are coming ahead of us. And just with that knowledge comes working together to develop the solutions of not only rapidly building the skills that are needed, but also the programs for getting the experience so that we could quickly put Canadians in the jobs as they emerge. So what I've seen us do is work together to mobilize our efforts here so that we are going to continue to support Canadians and the prosperity of Canada.
That's excellent. I think that mobilization point is such a great one. And it leads me to think about the enablers. What are the critical enablers that we need to see in place to not only continue this work, but broaden it and scale right across the country, which is something I often talk to Jake about. And so if we can kind of shift our mind a little bit to talk about enablers, there's some really interesting questions coming forward from our audience that I want to kind of bring forward to the panel. Pedro, the first one is for you, and it is regarding everything that we hear about future skills needs and projected demand. Lots of concern about not having good enough data to really inform what that looks like going forward to help us, make some sound decisions. And there seems to be a lot of disagreement on future trends. Can you talk to us a little bit about the evidence that FSC is building and or already has that's informing the confidence in the playbook that the center is putting forward?
It's a great question, and it's a perennial issue when it comes to skills development. And sometimes we say that data is a challenge, and for some reason we say it and we move on. We're trying to do a couple of things. The first one is just to recognize that whatever data exists, and there is plenty of data, that it actually needs to become much more customizable, and it needs to make sense for those who are using it. And this kind of pulls on a thread that Jake was talking about off the top around how is it that we create more open data that that all of us have access to. And if we're really going to shoot this through the lens of diversity and inclusion, we have to recognize that a lot of the organizations that are providing skills development and who are providing career advice are organizations that are community-based, that are grassroots, and that don't have a lot of extra space, right, to do data analysis, to dig through StatScan websites, to go through the Excel sheets, and to make sense of just like all of these data points that are emerging and moving very quickly. And so working with the Labor Market Information Center, we're actually trying to reverse engineer and put ourselves in the shoes of a frontline organization or a medium or smaller medium enterprise, anticipate how is it that you build a data-driven, evidence-based strategy for hiring, for training, for anticipating what changes are going to be. And from that standpoint, reverse engineer what data would be needed, how often, what is extra that is just noise, and how is it that we build some of those channels to be able to provide accessible, customizable data that makes sense for frontline providers. So that's one. The other is just, there's a lot of data and it needs to be consolidated. And one of the pieces of work that we're doing with the Conference Board of Canada, a consortium partner of the Future Skills Center, is to consolidate a lot of that data and to make sense of it from a skills perspective. So I think we need to do both. Yeah, we definitely need to consolidate and create new data that is much more relevant and more just in time. But we also need to focus on how is it that we ensure that those data pools, those data lakes make sense for those who are going to ultimately be using them, and understand that there are barriers now to be able to make sense of those, and that needs to be a priority.
Excellent. That's so great. And I love that you mentioned, or not a recognition, that at the frontline level, at the community-based level, direct service delivery is paramount and best, in often cases, determined to be best use of public dollars. Therefore, you do not see analysts, policy analysts, data analysts, but it is a critical need and a huge gap in the ecosystem. And it's great to see investments being made to address that, to make data more accessible and more user-friendly for those that are working day-to-day to address these concerns. The second question that's come up is again regarding an enabler, and it's regarding policy. And so the question is, one of the most powerful tools for building a fair and equitable labor market is strong employment equity legislation, federally at all levels. Frameworks that are restored, comprehensive, expanded, really looking at how to advance opportunities and increase access for people of color, for women, for individuals with disabilities, physical and or intellectual, to us LGBTQ plus individuals. How do we appropriately and consistently disaggregate in their application and implementation? How can we best make real this critical policy objective across all recovery efforts? And I thought maybe I'll throw this question to Jenny, just from a strategy perspective, in terms of how RBC might be looking at this. How do we best make real this critical policy objective in our Build Back efforts?
That's a great question, and one that I know we've seen a lot of discussion around, and ensuring that we're listening to diverse groups to understand the needs of, for the workforce as well. Whether it's engaging with the efforts around BIPOC and setting clear objectives, and establishing partnerships, I think is really important to enable this. And I think alignment across Canadians, across organizations on the need and the importance of mobilizing efforts on this is really important. You covered all of them, Gladys, around people of color, focus on women, Indigenous communities and people with disabilities. The crisis alone has just really amplified the need that we have to ensure that our policies are driving the right behaviors and the right efforts across Canada. And I think we're seeing a step up focus for sure on this. The other area that I'm also seeing of importance is the focus on the well-being of Canadians as well, and their mental health. I think that aligns, no matter what background you have or whatever. This is a very real crisis and a pandemic in itself. And, the efforts around this in mobilizing together to work on this has been quite inspiring and of critical need right now. So there are a number of different layers of opportunities that we see here. And I do see it around working cross-centric sectors with government, with Canadians to establish the policies that we need, and the programs as well to support that as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Wellness in the workplace, such a critical factor. And sometimes when we mention that, we think about the benefits of, extended health benefits and mental health days and things like that. When it comes to a community of practice, we often talk about wellness in the scape of how to address crisis. and not so much this ongoing effort to make sure that our workplaces are healthy and inclusive, and not always on the same page in terms of what do we mean by a healthy workplace. There are states and there are different cities with legislation that have identified racism and discrimination as key contributors to mental unwellness. And so how do we address that? We've seen increasingly, we're in a space of great accountability and demand for accountability of organizations to make sure that they are not only acknowledging where they fall short, but they're putting parameters and practices and supports in place for their employees. And so I just wanted to throw over to Filsan and share, is there anything that you're hearing from the Youth Advisory Council in terms of their expectations of employers as we go through this stage, as they step into new environments, on what kind of working environment they're providing? You know, what do they expect from employers in terms of wellness and addressing some of these issues that we've just mentioned?
Yeah, thanks, Gladys. So firstly, I'd like to say that within the Youth Advisory Council, we have about 8 different large companies or 7 different large companies represented within the youth that are working in different industries and different fields. And I would say across the board, we hear that companies are doing really well with checking on their employees, sending out surveys, making sure that the items that are put out in the questions in the surveys are actually addressed later. It's not just a survey that's sent out and forgotten later. It's like things are actually happening, and they're seeing a difference in terms of tools to help with mental health, helplines, conversations happening within teams at a manager level. And with regards to the BIPOC item that you mentioned, I would say accountability is a huge one that we keep hearing about. I think that all these organizations are having the conversations, and I think it's time to, okay, we have all this, like Pedro mentioned, we have all this data. How do we now consume it? How do we make the data? How do we organize the data to where people can actually absorb it and actually make a movement and actually make a change? We have tons of opinions on how to address these types of issues and how to support all these different groups. And now it's just a matter of having the hard conversations and putting pen to paper and getting movement started and actually taking action. I think that's the main thing that the council is like, let's see some action, let's do something. And how can we help? Engage us as well, right? For all the leaders watching, contact your teams, and let's get some projects or some actions going, and let's make a difference. Yeah,
that's great. And so, taking action. What does taking action look like in NPower's case? Balancing between the expectations of young people, the needs of the employer, and how that's factored in how you're preparing young people to transition into the workplace. Julia, could you talk to us a little bit about some of the main lessons learned from the field, from your direct experience as NPower has grown over the years from 80-something to 1,500, 1,600 young people? Can you share some tidbits of wisdom there, what you've learned over time?
Sure. Well, a couple of things come to mind. And I think when Pedro said earlier, we're really talking about a roadmap, I think those are the things that the biggest lessons that we've learned are, how do we determine which skills are relevant, and then how do we deliver that training and get young people, into the workforce. A couple things. One is, and this was touched on a little bit, I think that each community into which we've expanded has different economic issues and needs. So keeping the focus on businesses and those local labor markets, we think is really essential. There isn't really a one-size-fits-all approach. We have to adapt our model in any given labor market. For example, what's happening in Calgary in the energy sector and the effect that's having on that local labor market is really different than what we're going to experience in Halifax or Vancouver or here in the GTA. So I think thinking local and thinking about different economic issues in each small economy is really important. We also believe that if you don't want segments of our citizens to be left behind, then skills training in and of itself isn't always enough. We believe that another real key to our success is due to our holistic approach. When we work with populations with barriers to employment, which could be lack of post-secondary education, lack of mentorship, no or little work experience. Providing skills training alone is not necessarily effective in moving all people into the workforce. Mentorship, professional skills, coaching are all also important. And in our case, we believe actual introductions to employers. That's how we achieve an 80% placement rate. For example, a newcomer who often many of the newcomers in our program do have post-secondary education, but it's not Canadian education. They don't have Canadian work experience and may not really have a great understanding of the Canadian work culture or any network at all. You might be surprised how difficult it is, even with post-secondary education, for them to break into the labor market without some intervention or introduction. And lastly, I think that, and this goes back to the prior conversation about equity, diversity and inclusion in the workplace. It's not so much about legislation, but I think around hiring practices. I think we could really move the dial regarding bridging skills gaps by encouraging employers to expand their options when it comes to hiring practices. There's NPower, it's not just NPower, but there are lots of similar like-minded organizations that are really good out there that can provide, diverse custom trained talent in addition to traditional hiring pipelines. And equity, diversity, inclusion is an important element of that. It's important to our employers now more than ever. And it's really integral to our program. 80% of our participants are from racialized backgrounds. 38 plus, I think it's closer to 40% now, newcomers and refugees, and 42% of our graduates are women, which in the IT sector is really quite high. So, I just think really pushing that agenda around alternative hiring practices is really important. And it's not just about, when we talk about diversity, it's not just about those socio-demographic factors. Diversity in hiring also includes, as Filsan very brilliantly said early on, looking at candidates that may not have that post-secondary degree. Maybe you can't check that box, or maybe they have international education or credentials, but they do have the skills that are required to do the job. And that's what really it boils down to for good business, isn't it? Can the person do the job, not whether you're checking a box? And so it really means looking at micro-credentials, industry-specific credentials that speak to a person's skills. And hiring really based on a skill base versus a specific kind of traditional pedigree.
No, I think that's so important to think about. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, great to say, okay, we're going to expand the pool of talent that we're looking at, but we also need to think about where are you identifying those talent pools. Diversify the resources that you're tapping into in terms of being able to access that talent. And groups like NPower may be ones that companies haven't originally considered, but certainly should think twice about now in terms of facilitating that process, helping to facilitate that process for them. And so I think that's such a great point that you had mentioned. There's another question from the audience that builds on this notion of inclusivity, and it's really about what happens as the labor market starts to open up, as economies start to open up, and a particular concern for those individuals with disabilities. And the question is that disabled people are really benefiting from our increased ability to work remotely, to be able to work from home due to the pandemic. As things start to open up and there may be a shift to expect individuals to return back to traditional workplaces, what's the potential impact on those individuals, and how do we safeguard opportunities for people with disabilities? And so how can businesses continue to provide or expand upon workplace accessibility to get more individuals living with various challenges into the workplace? And I thought maybe I'll throw this question over to Jenny just to give some thoughts to us.
That's a great question. And again, if I go back to thinking about how we're living we're in a live experiment now. These are one of the things that we are clearly learning. And it's definitely benefiting many people and persons with disabilities for sure. I do think that as we start to come out of this pandemic, what many organizations have learned about is, the importance of providing that flexibility, really understanding, like, when do you need to be in an office? When can, what are the different ways of distributing work and allowing people to work where they are going to go work and be their best? So there is I would say in this space, lots of learning. Many organizations, especially large, I mean, all the large banks are definitely talking about this, is, you know, what is workplace of the future, and how do we enable our future workforce by providing the flexibility that I believe everyone has learned and in many ways appreciated. But also part of the flexibility is if you choose to come to the office and you don't need to always be there, you have the flexibility coming back. Or if you choose to be working from home, knowing when that work, you know, that a lot of work can be done from home now. We've learned that, you know, and that will be maybe a way that we negotiate in terms of different offers, employment offers going forward. You will see more of that flexibility. So I really think that many people are focusing on this, many organizations are, and I believe many diverse groups, including persons with disabilities, will benefit from this. We've even talked about people who are, you know, they're saying people who are introverts actually benefit more and feel better about working from home and communicating this way. Again, I think this will be an exciting workplace in the future.
That is so great. Thank you, Jenny. It's. I think one of the things you emphasize there is choice. Encouraging employers to provide choice to employees as we start to open back, and what that looks like to participate in the working environment, the traditional working spaces, but not forgetting that it is possible to be productive and make strong contributions. And some of those challenges that we are accommodating for can't always be seen. To your point about introverts. And so I think that's wonderful. I'm going to throw one more question out, if that's okay, before we get to wrapping up with some final thoughts. And this one is to Pedro. And so I sit as a member of the Future Skills Council, and we've been actively working on developing a set of recommendations to think about how Canada becomes a learning nation and how we start to build critical skills and advance a large national strategy to do this. We identified 5 key priorities in that report, which was recently released. One is to help Canadians make informed choices, to the point we made earlier regarding labor market information accessibility. A second one was equality of opportunity for ongoing lifelong learning. And one of the questions from the audience was about, in one particular province, a shift to performance-based outcomes when it relates to graduate employment and what kind of programs and services we're investing in, and what that means in terms of a competition between more traditional fields versus humanities and social sciences, and what impact that may have on students' choices going forward. The third is skills development to support Indigenous self-determination. The fourth is new and innovative approaches to skills development and validation. And the final one is skills development for sustainable futures. All of this speaks to how do provinces, how do policymakers now take these recommendations and move them towards action. And so I wanted to just throw a question out to Pedro regarding how do we take a look at policy and enabling an inclusive future skills development approach to our recovery efforts.
Well, we recognize the obvious, which Canada is a federation, and we recognize that a lot of what skills development needs to be is innovation from the bottom up. Just yesterday at Future Skills Centre, we launched our regional soundings tour. It's going to take us virtually all across Canada. And yesterday I was virtually in St. John's with some great friends, and we were having conversations about what are the challenges and what are the great ideas that are emerging that we need to focus on the road to recovery. The federal government has recently announced an additional $1.5 billion to provincial and territorial governments for further investment. And I think that, that level of collaboration is something that we need to continue to drive. We at Future Skills Centre are really listening to the innovation that's happening, coming from the ground up from various sectors, and trying to create an agenda that allows us to talk to each other about what works, and then to have things like a community of practice developed by our partners at Magnet that creates a way for people to come together, identify shared themes, and work together on problem solving emerging challenges. But I wanted to end by just pointing to another policy lever that I think we really need to keep our eye on, and that is employment insurance reform. And the reason why I'm mentioning employment insurance reform is because we tend to think about employment insurance reform as the safety net, right, around income, which is really important as people go through transition. And it is that. but it's something else. Part 2 of employment insurance is about labor market activation. It's about access to skills development and training programs that you only get if you're on employment insurance. And if you're one of those people, only 1 in 2 Canadians actually have access to training through their workplace. And if they're unemployed, odds are that they probably are only going to get the right kinds of skills development if they qualify for EI. So the conversation about employment insurance reform is a conversation about how we modernize a basic pillar of our income security and training agenda across Canada for more and more people who are going to be going through transitions, who are going to need some support, just see them through, but who will also need access to the right kind of training and good training to allow them to get back into the workforce. So this agenda around employment insurance reform is so critical to scale the right kinds of open doors for an increasing number of people. And I really hope that alongside us talking about innovation, best practices, what we can learn and what we can do better, which we will do, that we also don't forget that this has to be scaled to every Canadian, and that right now it's increasingly women, BIPOC populations, younger people who have the hardest time accessing EI. And that means not just barriers in terms of accessing financial security, but also a closed door when it comes to accessing skills development. So let's change that.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for that, Pedro. I really wish that we had more time because that is such a hot button topic that I wish we could dive into. And so, Jake, I'm throwing it back to you to put that on the agenda for a future conversation to talk about modernization and how that modernization of existing policies can support the Build Back Better effort going forward. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for participating today, and I will throw it back to Jake to wrap us up.
Thank you so much, Gladys. And again, thank you to all of you. The time flew by. Obviously, I'm interested in this subject, but I'm sure our audience was equally captivated. So thank you for engaging us online today with this amazing conversation. Pedro, Julia, Filsan, Jenny, thanks for sharing your thoughts on skills. Obviously, we need these to sort of rebalance our economy. As I mentioned earlier, personally, I think it's essential to our recovery, but evidently the federal government agrees with more funding going to skills than ever before announced in this federal speech from the throne, excuse me. And then honestly, it's your leadership that I'm looking forward to in taking those dollars, taking that vision and turning it into a reality. It's the roadmap that you all described and that I think is what others are going to have to follow, from open data and ecosystems, from building innovation and skills-based training and education to policy enablers, to fight inequality, even using the technologies that in the past may have exacerbated it, even some of the financial arrangements that might have exacerbated it, flipping them on their heads so we can really now focus on skills and equity instead of the opposite. And finally, as Julia pointed out, the secret sauce of this, whether it's NPower's or the entire system, is hiring based on skills and equity. You are the leaders and the role models, and I'm hoping more organizations can follow your leading practices. And we hope that you can join us for some of our upcoming events as well. I'm going to list a few of those coming up in the next few days. So really quickly, next Tuesday on December 8th, we'll be hosting the president of Loblaw Companies, Sarah Davis, for a discussion leading through the pandemic and how she's done so, how she's innovated to stay relevant, and how Loblaw Companies has more generally. On the next day, on Wednesday, December 9th, we're going to host a panel of financial and policy experts, including Mark Wiseman and Gerald Butts, to help Canadians understand the challenges involved in sustainable investing, another key subject to build on this conversation around equity. We hope you can join us. Thank you again to the Canadian Bankers Association and the Future Skills Centre for sponsoring today's event. Our events would not be possible without you, our sponsors. So again, thank you for your continued generosity. Thank you to our AV supplier, Van Valkendenburg Communications and LiveMeeting.ca, for making it possible for us to come together virtually today. And guests, thank you for joining us. Please stay healthy and safe.